Imagine you're sitting at a stoplight, and a guy pulls up next to you in a car that probably costs more than your first three houses combined. You look at the leather, the digital dash, the way the LED lights blink like they're from the future, and for a split second, you feel this weird, itchy sense of inadequacy. You look at your own dashboard, maybe there's a little dust in the vents or a coffee stain on the console, and you think, man, what am I doing wrong? Why don't I have that? You start doing the dangerous mental gymnastics where you convince yourself that a $600 monthly payment is actually an investment in your mental health. It's that subtle, quiet pressure to keep up with the ghost that's haunting your bank account. My name is Marcus Sterling, and I help people understand money, personal finance, and building wealth. And honestly, I spend way too much time obsessing over why the car industry is designed to keep you broke while making you feel like a celebrity for 15 minutes. I've realized that most people aren't actually buying transportation, they're buying a social mask that they have to pay for every 30 days. It's a total racket. If you want to stop bleeding cash every time you turn a key, you need a hard, mathematical line in the sand. You need the rule of 30. Now, let's be totally honest here. The car dealership is basically a laboratory designed to study how to separate a human being from their future retirement. Everything from the smell of the air to the way they hide the total price on a tiny piece of paper is built to make you say yes to a bad deal. They ask you what you can afford per month because they know that if they can get you to focus on a small number, like $500, they can hide a massive $70,000 debt behind it. It's like hiding a pill in a piece of cheese for a dog. You're so happy with the cheese that you don't realize you're swallowing something that's going to make you drowsy for the next 7 years. Basically, the industry relies on the fact that most people are emotional buyers and terrible at compounding interest. The rule of 30 is your armor. It's a three-part framework: 10, 10, and 10 that adds up to a 30% ceiling on your car-related decisions. It's not a suggestion, it's a survival guide. If the car you want doesn't fit into these buckets, you don't buy the car. You walk away. You take the bus, you ride a bike, or you buy a 10-year-old Toyota that looks like a toaster but runs like a tank. It sounds harsh, but would you rather have a fancy steering wheel today or $1 million when you're 50? Because for most people, you can't have both. The first 10% is your down payment. You never, ever put down less than 10% in cold, hard cash. Honestly, if you can do 20%, you're a legend, but 10% is the absolute floor. Why? Because the second you drive that car off the lot, the value drops faster than a lead weight in a swimming pool. If you put zero down, you are instantly underwater. You owe the bank more than the car is worth. If you get into a fender bender next week and the car is totaled, your insurance might pay out $15,000, but you still owe $18,000 to the bank. You're paying for a ghost. You're paying for a memory. Having that 10% down gives you an equity cushion. It's your safety net. Plus, it's a test. If you can't save up a few $1,000s for a down payment, you have no business taking on a monthly debt. It's your budget's way of saying, hey, we aren't ready for this yet. I remember back when I was younger, I was looking at this sporty little hatchback. It was bright red, had the turbo, the whole 9 yards. I had about $500 to my name, and the salesman told me, no problem, we can do zero down and get you out of here today. It felt like magic. It felt like I was getting a free car. But my dad, who was the king of being a realist, pulled me aside and said, if you don't have the discipline to save the down payment, you don't have the discipline to manage the debt. I hated hearing it. I pouted for a week, but he saved me from a 5-year nightmare of being trapped in a loan I couldn't afford. That 10% is your entry fee to the world of responsible ownership. The second 10% is the one that really makes people mad. Your monthly car payment principal and interest must not exceed 10% of your take-home pay, not your gross income before taxes, but the actual money that hits your direct deposit. If you bring home $4,000 a month, your car payment limit is $400. Period. This is the wealth protector part of the rule. Most people are out here spending 20% or 30% of their income on their car. They are literally working 10 days a month just to pay for the vehicle that takes them to work. It's a circular trap. By keeping it at 10%, you ensure that your gap, the money you have left over to invest, remains wide enough to actually build a future. You see, the car payment is the single biggest wealth killer for the middle class. It's a consistent, heavy drain on your cash flow. If you take that extra $300 you could have spent on a nicer car and you put it into an S&P 500 index fund every month, after 30 years, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is the heated steering wheel worth $500,000 in your 60s? Most people say yes today and regret it tomorrow. The rule of 30 forces you to prioritize your future self. It's about being car comfortable instead of car poor. Then we have the final 10%, which is for the stuff everyone forgets, operating costs. This is your insurance, your gas, and your maintenance. This should also not exceed 10% of your take-home pay. People buy a car based on the monthly payment, but they forget that a luxury car needs luxury tires and luxury oil changes. They forget that a massive truck has a massive gas bill. If you don't account for this, you'll find yourself with a car that fits the payment rule but breaks your budget every time you go to the mechanic. If you're paying $400 for the loan and another $400 for gas and insurance, you're spending $800 a month on a machine. That's 20% of your $4,000 income. That's a lot of life to trade for a commute. Think about the total rule of 30 as a 20% total cap on your monthly income for transportation, with a 10% cash entry. It sounds conservative because it is. We live in a world that encourages you to be aggressive with your spending and conservative with your savings. I want you to flip that. I want you to be aggressive with your wealth building and conservative with your lifestyle. When you follow the rule of 30, you aren't just buying a car, you're buying a lifestyle that has margin. You're buying the ability to say yes to other things because your car isn't saying no for you. Basically, the car industry wants you to think in months. How much per month? How many months? I want you to think in decades. How does this decision affect me in 10 years? If you buy a car that's too expensive, you're stealing time from your future self. You're making yourself work longer. You're making your life more stressful. The rule of 30 is the antidote to that stress. It gives you a clear yes or no before you ever even step foot on a lot. It takes the emotion out of the equation and replaces it with logic. I see this all the time with people who get their first big promotion. They go from making $50,000 to $80,000, and they immediately trade in their perfectly good car for a luxury SUV. They think they've arrived, but what they've actually done is increase their lifestyle floor. They've made it so they have to keep making that high salary just to survive. They've traded their freedom for a leather interior. If they had just kept the old car and invested the difference, they could have been financially independent a decade sooner. It's a tragedy of small numbers that add up to a massive loss. Let's talk about the term of the loan, too, because this is where the 10% payment rule gets tricky. If you have to sign an 84-month loan to get your payment down to 10% of your income, you still can't afford the car. You're just spreading the pain out over a longer period. Ideally, your loan should be no longer than 48 months. If you can't make the 10% payment work on a 4-year loan, the car is out of your league. You're trying to play a high-stakes game with a low-stakes bank account. It's okay to drive a used car. It's okay to drive something that isn't a status symbol. Honestly, the most successful people I know drive cars that are 5 or 10 years old because they'd rather own the company than the car. I remember this guy I used to work with, let's call him Brian. Brian was the king of the car reveal. Every 2 years, he'd show up with a brand new, top-of-the-line vehicle. He'd talk about the features, the horsepower, the tech. Everyone was impressed. But one day, we were talking about retirement, and Brian got really quiet. He was 55 years old and he had less than $20,000 in his 401k. He had spent his entire life surplus on the cars he drove to work. He was literally driving his retirement fund. It was a wake-up call for me. I realized that the cool guy at the office was actually the one in the most trouble. The rule of 30 is about avoiding being Brian. It's about recognizing that a car is a tool to get you to your life. It isn't the life itself. When you buy a car that fits within the 10/10/10 framework, you have peace of mind. You aren't worried about a scratch in the parking lot because the car doesn't represent your entire net worth. You aren't worried about a spike in gas prices because you have plenty of margin in your budget. You're in control, and that control is worth more than any new car smell could ever be. Actually, there's a funny thing that happens when you start following these rules. You start to realize how much of our society is built on a house of cards. You see the people in the fancy cars, and instead of feeling jealous, you feel a little bit of pity. You wonder if they are stressed. You wonder if they are underwater. You wonder if they are just one check engine light away from a meltdown. Meanwhile, you're rolling in your paid-off or low-payment vehicle, watching your investment account hit new all-time highs. That's the real dopamine hit. That's the real boss move. So, how do you apply this? First, you have to be brutally honest with your numbers. Pull up your last 3 months of bank statements. Look at what you're actually bringing home. Then, do the math. What is 10%? That is your ceiling. Next, look at the cars that fit that ceiling. It might mean you're looking at a 3-year-old Corolla instead of a new Lexus. It might mean you're looking at a base model instead of the limited edition. Embrace it. Find the pride in being the person who makes smart decisions. And don't let the salesperson talk you out of it. They'll try everything. They'll tell you about special financing or loyalty rebates. They'll try to make you feel like you're being too cheap. But remember, they aren't the ones who have to pay the bill for the next 5 years. You are. You are the CEO of your life, and they are just a vendor. You set the terms. You bring the rule of 30 to the table, and if they can't meet it, you walk. There are millions of cars in the world. You don't need that one. You need the one that fits your life and your future. Basically, the rule of 30 is a filter. It filters out the ego, the marketing, and the peer pressure. It leaves you with a decision that is based on reality. And reality is where wealth is built. You can't build $1 million portfolio on a foundation of car debt. You build it by being the person who is boring with their big expenses so they can be extraordinary with their results. I want you to imagine yourself 5 years from now. You followed the rule of 30. Your car is either paid off or it's been a tiny, manageable part of your budget. Because you didn't overspend, you were able to invest an extra few $100s every month. Your net worth has jumped. You've got a massive emergency fund. You're looking at that same guy in the fancy car at the stoplight, but this time, you aren't feeling inadequate. You're feeling free. You're feeling powerful. You realize that you've won the game that he doesn't even know he's playing. That's the goal. Not to have the best car, but to have the best life. And the best life is one where you aren't a slave to a monthly payment. It's a life where you own your time and your choices. The rule of 30 is the key to that door. It might feel like you're restricting yourself today, but you're actually liberating yourself for tomorrow. Honestly, it's one of the simplest rules in finance, but it's also one of the hardest to follow because it requires you to stand up to yourself. It requires you to tell your ego to sit down and be quiet. But if you can do that, if you can master that one impulse, the rest of your financial journey becomes so much easier. You've proven that you're in charge. You've proven that you value your freedom more than a status symbol. And once you prove that, there's nothing that can stop you from reaching your goals. So, next time you feel that itch for a new car, where you find yourself scrolling through car listings at 2 in the morning, just pull out the rule of 30. Do the math. Stay within the lines. Your future self will thank you every single time they check their bank account. You aren't just buying a car, you're buying your freedom, 10% at a time.